You know, if you're going to have a plan or do something great, you need to have a plan. Does that make sense? For some of you, just getting to this conference, you needed to have a plan. Ron Dye drove all the way from Ontario. That's a nice short drive, right, Ron? Yeah, he and Debbie, they're shaking their head. He said to me yesterday, if I'd have known how hard it was going to be snowing between Ontario and La Grande, I may not have came. I'm glad he didn't study his plan too much. But anyway, because we're glad you're here. But if you're going to do something great, you've got to have a plan. And the Oregon Ministry Network has a plan. We have a plan that we believe, as I said last night, is downloaded from heaven itself through our lead pastor and through our executive leadership team. And we believe that if we will work the plan, I like this statement I've heard a few times, it'll work if you work it. We believe if we work the plan that God will accomplish through us all He intends to accomplish. Part of the plan includes a mission statement. I also mentioned last night that for me that's a prophetic mandate that states what God intends for us to do. I want us to look at one slide, if you can put that up there. By the way, you sound guys and media guys, thank you. Everything's been great as far as you go as well. Thank you. So here behind us, you'll see that there is our mission statement is to develop effective leaders and build healthy churches and ministries. Once you've determined the mission or the plan, you then need a strategy to carry it out, right? We know we want to go from point A to point B. Well, how are we going to get there? We need a strategy. And here's some strategy. Our number one is to encourage through relationships. To encourage through relationships, to enrich through resources, to enlarge through reaching out, and to expand through raising up. Because we feel this plan and strategy is from God Himself, and because we want the blessings of God, or to use a good Pentecostal term, the anointing of God, in all that we do, we never plan anything in the Oregon Ministry Network that doesn't fit within the mission and strategy that I just mentioned. I think you can see that at the Smaller Church Conference, we're very intentional about this. We only want to do things that God has told us to do and then custom fit them for this venue. I think it's pretty simple to see that we've done that. The first two sessions this morning are directly tied to our number 2 strategy, which is to enrich through resources. To enrich through resources. It might feel a little different than a worship service, but it's very much important. In fact, some of the stuff we will talk about today and some practical helps is meant to help you. We want to enrich you by offering potential resources. The Oregon Ministry Network is blessed to have a number of partners in ministry. By the way, one of the partners in ministry, and they're listed in your plan, but we haven't said anything yet about them, but it's Church Extension Plan. Your lanyard says Church Extension Plan. Gene, did I see you here this morning, Harrelson? So, Gene, raise your hand high, Gene. So, Gene Harrelson's right there, and most of us know, but Church Extension Plan has been a partner and has actually began right here in the Oregon Ministry Network years ago, and they're there to assist you in financial investment, retirement, loans in any way, and I would encourage you to talk to them. Another one of these great partners is Brotherhood Mutual Insurance. And for years we have partnered with them on many occasions. And how many of you, by the way, are connected with Brotherhood in one way or the other? Raise your hand. Look around the room. So this morning we have a couple of gentlemen. We have Jim Reed, who's here. Thank you, Jim, for coming and giving up your Saturday to be with us. And we also have Ben Laro, and I want Ben to come. He and I are going to share some stuff that we think will be very helpful with you. Ben, why don't you come? Let's welcome Ben Laro as he comes. Thanks for giving up your Saturday.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Hey, tell us about... I said Brotherhood Mutual, but really it's a much... You have a lot more to offer than just one venue. Talk to us about that, would you?
Sure. So, first of all, my name's Ben. I help represent an agency that for the last 30 years has helped provide resources, including insurance and risk management for ministries. And that is our passion. I consider that my calling and my vocation. It's kind of a tough act to follow after a great worship song. But, you know, as I sat there and the song was ending, I thought about this really being an extension of worship, of stewardship to our churches. I'm not here to sell you insurance today. I do not have my insurance hat on. It's not a sales speech. We come here because we are passionate about protecting your ministries, your reputation, and the integrity that you have within your communities. And whether you've been a pastor for 6 months or you've been a pastor for 30 years in this room, you understand that there is a business side that comes with ministry. And what I believe is that you were called to be pastors, and that's why you're here in this room. And I also believe that there's people like us who can partner with you and stand shoulder to shoulder with you to help manage the business aspect of your ministry so that you can do what God has really called you to do. And so over these next few minutes, what we really want to do is give you some think-abouts. Some things to consider that we've learned over the years can make a tremendous difference in the success or lack thereof of your ministry. And we want you to know that you're not alone, that there's resources available, that you don't have to reinvent the wheel, and that you can lean on professionals within the community who are like-minded Christian people who can help you guys stay on the right track.
You know, Ben, I got a call just a couple days ago. Are we hotter than we were here? Hello. Excuse me. I got a call a couple of days ago, and it really had to do with a legal question. Somebody was working on an MOU and a contract between a nonprofit that wanted to rent their buildings. And some of you, as I look around the room, so many of you raised your hand and said, well, I know about Brotherhood Mutual. But there are some things that I didn't know about Brotherhood Mutual until just in the last recent few months that I think are going to be extremely beneficial and cost-effective for you. So that was one of the reasons. So don't tune this out. I think it's going to be helpful. And here's how it's going to work. We are going to attempt to go for about 20 minutes, and I've got some questions. Ben and I have worked these questions out. We're going to talk through a few things that we think are some hot topics, some topics that potentially can get you in trouble. And then at the end, we're going to allow about 10 minutes of Q&A. So have your questions ready. It's only going to be about 10 minutes, and then you're going to have to follow up in another way. But first of all, there are some topics that you and I have talked about, and one of them is guidelines for ministry workers. And by the way, around the table, you should have received some things that just came out. You can help follow along if you'd like. Why is a background check and a written policy important for a smaller church? And I want to follow that up with this statement. I'm often in churches that say, well, after all, we know everyone in our church. They've all been part of our church for years, and we've never done it before, so why do we need it now? How would you respond to that?
Well, I would say this. When we go out and we meet with ministries and we put on workshops in different places, and when you have new and young families that come to your church, the first thing that they're thinking in their mind is this place safe? And so I think you guys get the fact that it's important to create a safe environment in order to build that foundation for successful ministry. And we are the first to say that we don't think background checks prevent abuse. In fact, when you do research and studies, you find that many offenders of children and others have a perfectly clean record, perhaps not even so much as a speeding ticket. But what I think about more importantly is your ministry's reputation and integrity in the community. And if you have been in ministry long enough, you have probably been involved in one way or another, some type of serious allegation or accusation within your ministry. And you know that it's absolutely critical how you respond to that allegation. And so one of the things that we encourage ministries to do is to look at what is common in the industry. And so if every other ministry around in your community is doing background checks and reference checks, and they're making sure that people are a part of your church for 3 to 6 months before they get involved in your nursery or youth programs, then that's what you should be doing. Because if you should find yourself in court, even on a false accusation, you are going to be judged against your peers. The judge and the jury are going to go out and they are going to ask this question. Was your church, fill in the name, doing what is common to the industry? And if you're not, because you're way out in left field and everybody else is doing something else, it's going to make you look bad. You see, it doesn't have anything to do with insurance at the end of the day. Because your insurance company, whoever you're with, is going to defend you for that accusation. Whether you were negligent or goofy or whatever term you want to use. But your reputation and your integrity will be impacted for years. And that's what we want to protect.
Good. Second part I want to touch on is the transportation policy. Again, a question. Why is a transportation policy important for every ministry, even those that don't have a church-owned vehicle?
Okay, sure. So we understand that a lot of small ministries rely on private transportation. And we believe this, and it's certainly true based on statistics. If your ministry is going to be brought into a large lawsuit, it is probably going to involve a vehicle. And we have some of our smaller ministries that say, we don't own any church-owned vehicles, so we don't really take on that exposure. But the reality is, if you don't have a church-owned vehicle, then you are relying 100% on volunteer drivers, on private transportation, on parents, on youth leaders, perhaps you, to transport folks within your ministry to church-sponsored activities. And what we want you to know is that in Oregon, by law, insurance follows the vehicle. And so your ministry has a liability exposure because it sponsored the activity. And from a stewardship perspective, your volunteers that are using their personal vehicle for ministry use should know that their insurance has to be first by law. We've ended up in situations where volunteers have come back to you, the pastor, and they've said, oh my gosh, I thought I was driving on behalf of the church, and now my spouse and I are being sued because we were hit head-on by a drunk driver. We didn't even cause the accident, and yet we're being sued. And that's how it works in Oregon. It doesn't have anything to do with your insurance company. And so what we want you to do is make sure that you have a transportation policy for your church, whether you have a church-owned vehicle or not. So it's doing things like making sure that that private vehicle that's being used has a current insurance ID card, that you've done a motor vehicle record check so that you know that that driver doesn't have a terrible record. And if we had more time, I could share some stories with you that are hilarious and also concerning, but where ministries have really jeopardized their success and their reputation in their communities because they did not manage the transportation.
When you and I were talking a month or so back and just talking through maybe some talking points, one of the things you mentioned, number 3, was a contingency planning, including emergency response. And to be honest with you, Ben, that sounded Greek to me. I wasn't sure what you meant by that. So what I want to ask you is, what do you mean by that? And then tell us why we need to know about this.
Well, I'm Italian, so the
Okay.
Greek part isn't surprising. I would say this. This is what I'm personally most passionate about. If I was to sit down with each of you in your ministries and I was to say, what is important to you, you would say the people that come. You see, this weekend is all about you gathering in this building. And Joe and Praise, they've provided a great building and a great place to meet. But at the end of the day, I think Joe would agree with me and say this. It's just a building. We want to be good stewards of it. But at the end of the day, we gather here for the relationships that are established and built. And so here's my question to you, and this gets at your question. Where would you meet as a church if you lost access to your building? If you had a fire, if you had a water loss from those terrible freezes that we just went through, where would your ministry meet? How would your ministry continue? And see, at the end of the day, it doesn't have anything to do with insurance, because it could be as simple as establishing a reciprocal agreement with the high school or a middle school in town, or maybe a church down the road that is similar in size. And it's just about having a plan, because the worst thing that can happen is you don't have one, and your church isn't able to meet, and your insurance pays for your building to be rebuilt, but it takes 6 or 9 months to have done. You have this wonderful ribbon-cutting ceremony, but nobody comes back. You had to lay some of your staff off because you couldn't afford to make payroll, because you weren't gathering to bring in the tithes and offerings that help pay for the expenses of the church. Emergency response is addressing things like maybe threats within your ministry. What happens if you have a disruptive individual come into the back of the church and curse at the pastor in the middle of service, or somebody makes a threat to your secretary over the telephone line? So it's about having a plan so that in advance, so that you can swivel around in your chair, pull out that binder, and execute that plan so that your ministry can continue.
So you also spoke about a code of conduct, communication guidelines for youth, and social media. And a question I have is this. For ministries that aren't sure where to start in this area, how would you prioritize this work, especially a smaller church that may not have a lot of internet or social media activity?
Sure. So you know that we live in a changing world as it relates to the values that we have in our culture, social media, and here's what we're finding in ministries that makes a tremendous difference. You should have within your ministry a code of conduct for your volunteers, because you and I would agree with this. We represent Christ in and out of church and in the supermarket. And what we're finding is that we have volunteers that are sometimes living their life contrary during the week from how they live it in church. And it's getting posted on their social media pages. And they might be a nursery or a Sunday school teacher, and the kids are getting dropped off on Sunday morning, and the parents are walking away scratching their head going, man, I'm surprised you're here. That was a rough Saturday night based on what I saw on your Facebook page. And here's the deal. It affects your ministry's reputation. It affects your ability to minister. And so understand that you have the ability and the freedom to hold your staff and your volunteers accountable to a code of morals and conduct that would bring honor to your church in the name of Christ. You are conservative-minded ministries. We work predominantly with them. When the Supreme Court rules changed regarding same-sex marriage, as an example, it impacted a lot of our ministries, and we received a lot of phone calls. And you can be taken to court. We saw within the first month of the Supreme Court ruling taking place, a ministry brought to court for discrimination. You say, well, wait a minute. Where's the separation of church and state? There is that separation, but it doesn't mean that you can't get an attorney to pick up a case. And you are going to have to go to court and defend that. And one of the best things you can do to prevent that is not just go with the bylaws and the guidelines provided by OMN, but to have something personalized within your own ministry. So let's be very specific. Does your ministry have a marriage policy? Not your bylaws. Not we adhere to OMN and those tenets of faith in our beliefs, but your specific ministry have a marriage policy. And does it state what that is? I love it when pastors call. They have a plan in place and they say, Ben, this is what happened. We had a couple come in and we got to love on them in a godly way, and we got to say, gosh, it's so great to meet you. Thanks for stopping by. Would you have 10 minutes or 15 minutes for us to sit down and talk about our church's marriage policy? And if they're able to swivel around in their chair and pull that off the shelf and lay it across the table, they may not agree with everything that it says, but they are going to have a much more difficult time arguing that you have discriminated against them. The worst thing that happens, and this happens, and you could maybe relate to this, is you have that situation come up on Monday morning, and on Monday night you call an emergency board meeting because you need to write a policy. And the following week you get a letter from a law office. You see where that goes? You met as a leadership team following that event, and you developed that policy following that situation. And so part of the reason that we're talking about these things this morning is the more proactive you can be in handling these things, the more it is going to be less disruptive for your ministry. And you get to focus on what's most important.
Yeah, I want to point out, especially for the Mission Oregon churches represented in the room, they don't just stop with you. There's an ascending liability that goes all the way to the network and even ultimately general counsel. That's just not Mission Oregon churches alone, not just for Mission Oregon Church alone, but for all of us. And we're all in this together. And while we said last night, and we've said it over and over, we can do more together, we also can be smarter together. So let's make sure that we are smarter together, okay? So, number 5 here is talking about an employee handbook. I watched a commercial years ago, Ben, and I don't even remember who it was for or what it was about, but here's what I remember. This consultant, a pair of them actually are standing giving a presentation to what appears to be a corporate board. And as soon as they give the presentation, the board all nods their head in affirmation and says, he's right. And they look at the consultants and they say then to them, you're right, we need to do this. Well, what do we do? And they look at each other with a bewildered look and say, well, we don't know. We tell you what's wrong, but we don't help you. I know that's not the case with you guys. And when it comes to employee handbook, I want you to comment on that. But then all of these, do you have resources and things that can help us address all the things that you just pointed out that we need to fix?
Yeah, so on your tables, you will see a little brochure called Legal Assistance. And I will just use this discussion real briefly on employee handbooks to introduce this particular service. Let me first preface this by saying you do not have to be a client or insured with Brotherhood Mutual in order to take advantage of this service, okay?
What did you just say?
You do not, the key word being not, have to be an insured of Brotherhood Mutual to take advantage of this service. Now let me explain. The Legal Assistance Program is a group of attorneys who are fellow Christian attorneys. I know some of you are going, that doesn't go together. I thought that for a long time too. Don't worry, it does. And they are passionate about what they do. See, their calling is just like your calling. And it's what gets them up out of bed in the morning. And these are not your general Jack and Jill attorneys, but these are attorneys who specialize in respective disciplines. So let's just talk very briefly for a minute about employee handbooks. What I have found in my experience is that one of the greatest opportunities for our small church congregations is that employee handbooks are often overlooked. And we are seeing an increase in the number of employment-related claims within churches. And it is costing churches a lot of money. For those of you not familiar, employment practices liability is a coverage that provides protection for your ministry against things like wrongful termination, discrimination in the workplace. Sexual harassment can be extended there. Now understand that none of those things must have taken place. There simply has to be an accusation of it. And one of the best ways you can prevent your ministry from being falsely accused is having job descriptions, having a clear process for performance reviews and performance plans, and having an employee handbook. And so let's go back and talk about legal assistance. There is an attorney within the legal assistance program team that specializes exclusively and only in employment practices liability. Now, with all of the topics that we've covered here in just the last few minutes, there is a best practice policy, or more like 5, that I could send you so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel. They have been vetted by attorneys, and it's not for a congregation of 6,000. It's for a congregational size of 150 or less. And it is considered a best practice document within the industry. You would have access to that document. You would be able to modify it to fit your ministry. And then you could give us a call, or your agent, and you could say, hey, Ben, this is what we would consider to be our final draft. And we would take that document electronically and we would submit it to an attorney who would do a complete legal review, sentence by sentence, line item by line item, and they are going to give you feedback. And there might be some things they give you feedback on where you go, gosh, that's great, I respect it, Mr. or Mrs. Attorney, but it doesn't fit my culture. Guess what? That's okay. You have flexibility in that. The company is not going to twist your arm and say you better do this or else. Their goal is to shoulder alongside you to help put some policies in place that are going to protect, remember, your ministry's reputation and integrity. They do this for your nursery programs, your youth policies. They would review your transportation policy. Again, each one of these attorneys specializing in their respective discipline, it costs you nothing.
How much?
Nothing.
So you don't have to be with the group, and they will charge you nothing.
That's right.
We told you we bring great resources.
Now, the other resource that you have on your...
One other question on this. I mentioned earlier I had the phone call. They're working on an MOU, a Memorandum of Understanding, or a contract, renting a building. Did they cover things like that? Would they look over that stuff? Yeah,
absolutely. And that's one of the biggest growing trends in ministry. Is some of you guys have buildings for large growth, for great capacity. Your congregation size is 90 or 100, but you could put 250 in your sanctuary. And you guys want to be good stewards of those buildings in your community. And it might be one of the nicer or bigger buildings in the community. And you have people that are approaching you saying, we want to use your facility during the week. We would like to have a homeschool co-op there. We would like to have Boy Scouts there. Whatever the group is, those are things that we help ministries with literally every week. So we have the ability to help you develop a building facility use agreement form. And check this out. Line item number 4 on the form says, we reserve the right to refuse to rent our facility to any group that has beliefs or values contrary to ours. You have the right to do that. Because you don't want a group with contrary values to come walking out of your building and have somebody driving by that was thinking about coming to your church on Sunday and has since changed their mind because they think you've partnered with that outside group. We help clients manage that process all the time. These attorneys would review those agreements and contracts.
And what would the cost be?
You need to sit in the back of the room during worship because your hearing is going bad. Nothing.
My dad always said, if it's too good to be true, sounds too good to be true,
Probably
it may be.
Yeah.
But as we've reviewed this, it's not.
Yeah.
And I just want to emphasize that.
The other resource on your table, which I'll talk about briefly, and then I think Brian was maybe going to walk around with a microphone for some Q&A. This is called Ministry Works. Just in all candor, there are no commissions given to any insurance agent or producer that sells this product. Okay, this is a way that this particular company gives back to ministries. Here's what we found. About 40% of ministries are out of compliance with the IRS in their tax filings, specifically when it comes to payroll. And by the way, for those of you that might not know, it can jeopardize your ministry's nonprofit status. I want you to think about the liability exposure that creates for you as the senior pastor and your fellow board members. And so this service will take care of your ministry's payroll taxes, the local, state, and federal tax filings. For the senior pastors in the room, it would allow direct deposit of your salary to be placed in your account, as well as other staff. And this company will also prepare your W-2 and any 1099s for contractors. Everything is filed by them electronically to the local, state, and federal government. And for those of you that are wondering what the cost is, it's $100 per employee per year. Pretty outstanding. You have the assurance that it's done properly. Sorry, that is something that costs.
That's great. No, that's almost free.
Almost free. And there's about an $80 additional fee, which is the cost for the electronic filing with the local, state, and federal government. And they simply pass that cost on to you. Okay, so for one employee within your church, you would be looking at a cost of about $180 annually. Forget the cost for a moment. This is one of the best things you can do to make sure you are in compliance with the IRS and that you don't jeopardize your ministry's nonprofit status.
Perfect. Thanks, Ben. Hey, Brian is here, and we have got 6 minutes, and we're going to take 6 minutes. We can't do many questions. We knew that we were going to spark conversation, and you can follow up through the brochures. But is there a question right here, Joel?
Okay, there it goes. Ben, you and I sat down and did a 2-hour review. Insurance review. Can you talk about the importance of doing that? I know from our conversation we discovered in the policy that we were able to make a claim that brought $5,000 back to our church. And I came away from that conversation and realized that's the best fundraiser we ever did.
Gosh, you started and I was liking everything you were saying for a minute, and then you went there and I went, no, don't do that. Not really. So here's the thing. We're not expecting you to be insurance experts, okay? Nor should you be. And you should be working with somebody who not only understands insurance and ministry, but has the ability to educate you and your staff on your current policy. You know, insurance, by definition, is the transfer of risk, for those of you that have never heard it put that way. And you know, there's some risks in your ministry that you will intentionally, by design, never get rid of. We sometimes refer to them as the youth pastors with the crazy painted hair, right? Our crazy youth guys. We don't want to get rid of them. They're the lifeblood of so many of our ministries. But they have to be managed, and your policy has to be managed. Your insurance policy has to be managed. And so here's what... Uh-oh. I just found out there's some youth pastors in the room. Oops. The gray-haired pastors in the room are going, thank you for sharing that. It's really important that you understand where you're taking on exposures and where you've transferred them with respect to insurance. We have some ministries that have chosen to transfer a lot of risk, and we have some that haven't by design. And they have large self-insured funds. They have large savings accounts. And they pay for those potential claims through those accounts. And we have others that operate on very, very tight budgets. And they say, gosh, if this happened, it would be absolutely catastrophic for our ministry. And if we didn't have a way to pay for it through insurance, there would be no way that we could recover from it. And the doors of their ministry would be closed. See, that's the serious part of this conversation. And so what you and I did was we sat down and we made sure that your policy fit your ministry. I love, love, love to get phone calls from our pastors and clients who say, Ben, this is the vision that we have for our church and our community. We absolutely know it's what God's calling us to do. But here's the deal. We have no idea how to get there. We don't know what the watch-outs are. We don't know what we should put in place. We don't know what we should consider. Understand this. Our agency represents the insurance and risk management programs for almost 950 ministries throughout Oregon, Washington, and Idaho. I can absolutely promise you there's probably not a question you can ask us that we have not answered before and that we have not already come up with a solution. And so your encouragement today should be that you are not doing this alone, that there is absolutely no need for you or your staff to spend 20 hours developing a policy that you have no idea where to start from, because we can send you 5 really good ones that give you a framework to start.
Another question. So we got 2 minutes to do 2 questions.
Hopefully this is quick and easy. People wanting to rent our church buildings for weddings, and there's obviously some groups that wouldn't match our standards. So where's the line? Because they're going to sue us if we say no to some and yes to some.
Okay, great question, and we deal with this regularly, and I would say that one of the things that sometimes breaks my heart is to see ministries close their doors to the community because they just go, man, that's too much risk. We don't want to address it. We're just not even going to go there. We're just going to close our door. We're going to have a Sunday service. We're going to have a Wednesday service, and that's it. And I don't really want ministries to go there unless you really feel like that's what you're called to do. So here's the solution. You have a best practice building use agreement that very clearly discusses and specifies who has the ability to rent your facility and who doesn't. And you can do that with respect to marriage. One of the important considerations when you start renting out your facility is the tax implications that it can have if you're generating income from those rentals. And it's simply a matter of working with your accountant. There's some miscellaneous tax income reports that you may need to file. It will not jeopardize your nonprofit status, but you just need to make sure you understand what you're doing in that area. And again, those are things that your agent can help you with.
We have Ricky over there.
Yeah, Ben, first of all, I just want to thank you for coming out here and shedding light on some of these issues that might affect us at the small churches. So thank you very much for coming out here for that. Also, I just wanted to ask, I just wanted some clarification. This payroll service is the one that we were talking about at $180 a year, and this legal assistance service, is that something that's offered, or is that an additional cost as well?
Should we let the group answer it? No. It's free. It's free. Hey, yeah, the legal assistance is absolutely free. You can go to brotherhoodmutual.com. You will find a link for legal resources. And by the way, here's something really important. There might be a really sensitive, confidential issue that you're dealing with in your church, and you're not comfortable approaching us or your agent or somebody else in your ministry for whatever reason. That's okay. You can go directly to the website, and you can send them a note. You can attach files, and they will review those documents for you. They're free. There is never a cost associated with the legal assistance. Now let me be clear on this as we close. These are attorneys. And if you've ever read the bottom of an email that you've received from an attorney, which you haven't because it's like that long, one of the things they'll remind you of is that you should get in contact with an attorney in the state of Oregon who is familiar with state law. Now let me say this. Our agency works with nonprofits who run on shoestring budgets, and I would say about 1% actually take the attorney up on that. Okay, the rest go, wow, that was really great feedback, and it was free, and I'm going to run with it because it's better than what we had before. And I'm going to tell you that that's probably okay, because the policies and the templates that you would receive from us or others are going to be considered best practice documents that have already been reviewed by attorneys. The reason we want you to look at them and modify them is because we want it to fit your ministry and your culture. Understand that if you put something in writing and you say we're going to follow this as a church and you don't follow it, that is what you're judged against in court. Exhibit A on the PowerPoint will be your policy and page 24, which your leadership team never read because they just put it as part of the template, and you will be judged against how well you followed that. And so we are all about simple, easy-to-execute policies that fit what you can actually do within your ministry.
Good. Jim Reed and Associates, we want to thank you for partnering with us. We want to thank you for being a blessing to us. And I know that many have purchased insurance and other services, but we also know that it goes beyond that, and we feel like a partner with you. We want to say thank you. And right before we close and officially say thank you, I would like to pray for you guys, because I can only imagine. Last night we mentioned that anytime you do something great for God and have that kind of a heart, the enemy always opposes that. And I'm sure you face that, and you're in an ever-changing world that the target is got to be on your back a lot. But